Hi everybody, this is Sam Edwards and welcome to FX PhD FLX208, and this is our first class. So we're looking at shots that I worked on for Cosmos, which was a television show on Fox here in the United States. I'm not sure where else it might have shown overseas. And we're going to be talking about advanced compositing techniques in batch for flame and flare. But all the demos will be on a flame system, and occasionally we will jump out to the desktop to talk about certain things. I comped all the shots that you're looking at, and this will be primarily our source material for our classes. And we'll be talking about all kinds of techniques that we use to do these. And some of them are fairly simple and straightforward, and some of them are a little more complex. Today we're talking about show setup, and we're talking about comping a basic shot where we kind of talk about the color space and the color science behind, and just the theory of how I approach this show. And so that would be our first step. Let's jump out of the player. I said out of the player, and exit flame. Bang. So great, let's clean up the desktop a little bit. We're going to double click on the flame for a first look at show setup. This was a television job, and for me it's really handy to work in the video color space for television, because it's kind of what you see is what you're going to get. So we're going to look at setting up a new project, and this is going to be the FX PhD demo. Great. And of course we're going to store it on our storage media, and we'll make a new setup directory that could be shared with somebody. It could be however you want to set it up. Well, first of all, the configuration file, we're going to base this on 23976 and free running, because we don't have any video output. We're just comping the shots. So it's free running. The frame code is 23976 because that's what we want embedded in the DPX files. The most important part that I'm trying to show you here today is that we want to be using the flame reactor, not the old classic engine, but the flame reactor engine. It's just super important. It brings a lot of new flexibility and power to batch compositing, and I promise you, if you try the things that we talk about in this episode without having the flame reactor engine, you won't be getting what we're looking for. And then let's just start off with a regular HD one. I said a regular HD one. But Cosmos, they were actually thinking they may go to cinema when they were planning the show, and so the whole show was done at 2048, and to be 16 by 9, it was 1152. And so we can just leave this at 16 by 9, but height to width shouldn't change anything. Our show delivery spec is DPXs coming in and out at 10 bits. So, and those are progressive. And I think it's really important to set all this up to your delivery spec. So you want to talk to your producer and find a delivery spec sheet for VFX for your show, and make sure that everything that you set up over here matches that delivery spec. And over here, everything says, at least the right frame rate, and that you're using the flame reactor engine. And it seems to me there's no kind of problem with uncompressed / raw. That seems to work really well, so we'll just keep that. So I'm not going to actually create a new project today. I'm going to cancel out because I already have a project that's all set up for this class. So we'll start flame. We're going to be working in a video color space for this show. Well, let's go really quick into batch we have. And let's talk about that really quick. Let's just make a colored frame. And let's put a G mask on top of that. Typing the G and sliding. Sorry, new tablet, so I'm a little slow on some of these things. And we're just going to make a shape real quick. Look at the result and even give it some offset. Great. So here's a G mask, like you might make for any project. And notice our size here from that colored frame and everything. Our format, is all inherited by the show format by default. And you really don't want to be typing, even when you make a colored frame, you don't want to be typing numbers here. You just want to be working at the resolution that you have. So setting that correctly is really important. Now notice when we're in the video mode for output, and there's three choices here. There's linear and there's log. And notice I actually have a LUT in there as well. But when we're in video mode and we switch between matte mode and RGB, nothing changes. So you spend so much time looking at mattes. And if we were to comp this show in linear, to really see our mattes, we'd have to be toggling that all the time. And same thing as if we were working in log like a movie, our mattes really don't look like how they're going to cut. So for me, working in video, but also just any video image looks like a video image. Now, realize that this show was photographed in log color space. When we look at that in video color space, we're seeing something that is it's not quite right, and that's what it's a log image, and we'll get around to dealing with that in a second. Let's stay with show setup for just a moment, and let's go over to our preferences and look at LUT for a second. And we have a few things that have been set up in this project. So basically, this is something that I inherited from working on movies way back in the day, where people would always set Control-Shift-1 to Gamma 1. So you always know that if you're in Control-Shift-1, what you see is the actual pixels as they exist and not changed in any way. I also made a 2D LUT because old habits die hard. I made a 2D LUT that looks about as close as a 1D LUT can to the CCC transform that is our standard look for the show. And then I made Gamma 2.2, and we use that to look up, and that's of course just typing a value here. And I made a Gamma 0.67. 2.2 is for checking shadows, and 0.67 is for checking highlights. And before I deliver a shot, I like to look at it both of those ways. And of course, as you'll see as I work through the comp, I also use these kind of alternative gammas to double check my work as I go. Over here in 3D transforms, we have basically, and that's going to be Alt-Shift-1 is going to be the standard CDL for the show, and that's a 3D transform. So it's actually what my clients are going to see when they review my material, and what they're going to see when they're in the DI facility as a starting point for the color correction. So this is how my shots are going to come up in that Alt-Shift-1. But mostly when I'm working, I'm just toggling, mostly because of habits. Shift-Control-1 puts me back to 0, Gamma 1, and the rest of them are alternate ways to look at my material. This Match CCC is for looking at logarithmic materials. The basic CCC of the show assumes that the input is camera raw and then in logarithmic form, and that this is how it's going to look on TV. So there we go. We've set up our LUTs, and I really want to just take you through comping a very kind of what I would say would be an easy peasy shot in Cosmos terms, and it's a basic A over B comp where we have a background that's already in video color space. It's kind of clearly not log and it's not linear, although those ways of looking at it might be revealing as you work through your comp. It's in video color space, and it's already been cropped and resized, so it's the nominal resolution of our show. And here we've got our shot of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who was shot overscan, which had saved my bacon about 100 times when tracking shots for this show. So they would supply these things to me overscan. But I knew that there was no repo on this shot when we began. So the first thing that we can do is we can just put a resize on Neil. And because we set up our show correctly, it's now the exact aspect of the show. So all the more reason to really work inside of a project that's set up properly for your delivery. This also needs to come into the same color space so we can comp it. We're just going to do a log to lin on it, and you can see that Neil was already shot to be in this kind of night scene. If you look really closely, you can see he's already got some kind of green lights on him and stuff because they already had the footage of the New York City skyline before they even shot Neil. They knew where he was going to be going, and he was really shot looking at this stuff. So now we've got, and this is, hold down the equals or the plus key, and clicking on it will turn both of these into our contexts. So we can look at context 2 and context 1. We have Neil and we have a background. Easy peasy, right? But they're now both in the same color space, right? Neil, they both look like to be in the right LUT. They're not, they're not mixed. And really you want to use LUTs and these presets over here to get all of your footage into one color space for compositing. The really amazing thing about using the new color space is that, and the new reactor engine, is that even values outside would continue to map higher and higher. So these log to lin and lin to log are 100% symmetrical, but there's also no loss except for, I believe, down into the blacks a little bit, but probably that's for the best. So there's no loss. We can have values that go from a standard log range, and they just keep going. And even if you couldn't see a value here, right, like maybe that speck highlight. No, not even that. So there is no values really above 1 here, but if there were, we wouldn't be losing them. And that's number one thing that's amazing about the reactor engine, is that you can go log to lin and lin to log. And it's kind of my opinion, and I could be wrong here, and I might, we might have a big discussion about this on the forum, that the Flame tool set was created to work in the video color space. A very large percentages of the systems out there are used in commercial and television post, that the tools are kind of really debugged and optimized for that color space. I could be wrong, but that has long been my view. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for a frame here with kind of maximum, what I would look for is the hardest frame to key. And here where his edge is crossing, one edge is crossing another with motion blur and hard chroma, that looks like it's going to be about the hardest frame to key that we're going to have. And I like to just go ahead and grab a master key, connect the front and the matte and the back, the back. I've got to put the matte down here. And look at a one-click key at the highest highlight of the scene. And to me, and even look at the matte, and look at the edge quality in the matte. Oh, and this is something I do every time I launch Flame, because of course some of these defaults don't stick. I always turn off filtering. It's really my view that you just go to View, and over here you want to turn off filtering. It's really my feeling that what I'm making are pixels, and I really need to see those pixels. And notice here, we'll go back. If you have filtering on, you have no idea what pixels you're making, or you have a much vaguer idea of what pixels you're making. So, vitally important, turn off filtering, first thing. And here we've got a key that where it doesn't really do a great job all the way out to the corners with the vignetting they have on this lens. I think the edge quality is really pretty good. It's a kind of an exact right down the line where Neil's face is, and in the blacks we're pretty much getting every last pixel of him, and that's with one single click, right? So, you know, this may be me, and notice I have auto key on, and I'm kind of a believer in auto key because I tend to set things and then, you know, and with the new kind of animation keep button, I don't feel like there's any great reason to have auto key off. But many people disagree, and I respect that. But, you know, you can play around with the key, but I think almost anything you do with a lot of these controls is not really going to help your edge quality one bit. That the first click on a nice key is, you know, you could try to like pull it in a touch, but you know, you either get some transparency in the middle or too much on the outside. And probably a little too much on the outside. So there we go. Step one is basically a one-click key, and I'm just a huge believer in the power of this. And you can, I think if you go over here where the blue screen is a little darker, and notice we have two pots here, and we're going to just use pot number 2 for that. And we can compare pot 2 and pot 1. You know, yeah, pot 2 is great way over in the corners, but in the center, it's really not right. So maybe just a touch of that in there. And that's about the edge quality. That's going to give us maximum edge quality. Let's deal with everything else where we need to deal with it. So we want to start by making a key where the edges are as good as they can possibly be. And the next step is the suppression, and notice that in his little thumb over here I can see probably more blue than my supervisor is going to let me get away with. So the way you get rid of that over here is range, and notice we can crank the range up about a half a number, off and on, and his thumb gets just about, you know, perfect. Jamming that up 0.5 helps his thumb, but kind of throws the baby out with the bathwater, so we're going to deal with that differently. The next thing is that he kind of has bright edges, and you know, that to me means that the blue screen was a little brighter than it should have been for best anti-aliasing with Neil, especially, you know, we have a black man in a black suit on a black sky. You know, you don't need a screen that's that bright, and especially when you have a green screen, which is naturally more luminant. You know, I honestly feel that blue was the perfect choice for this shot, but we'll just drop our luminance down. Hopefully it didn't wreck Neil. Let's just look at his face where everybody's looking. We're getting a touch of little suppression artifacts on the bluer grain on him, but I would say it's pretty darn acceptable. So, you know, I actually see a little blue over here too. But, you know, I don't think there's an amount of range that isn't going to discolor his very neutral jacket. So, not more than that anyway, right? So, back over here where we don't like our blue, we've got this keyer all set up. We're going to switch it to front color correct. And basically that gives us a suppressed foreground. And we'll copy and paste it and hook that up to our shot of Neil. We don't need the background because it's just Neil now. And over here we are going to jam up the range on this copy, right? We'll jam it up to about 0.5. And yes, his jacket's a little green. 0.5 I think is the right number. We're going to have to G-mask these two together. Getting a G-mask, getting where he doesn't look great. Put a little softness on there so no one will ever know. And we're going to try the blend and comp, which would be front, back, matte. And that just takes that bluish area and does a little better suppress. And I think that's going to look pretty good. Of course, we're going to need to animate this G mask, but we'll get to that. And I think we all know how to do that. Probably that's where everybody started, was animating G masks for a living. So we'll assume you know how to do that. Great. And now let's have a look at our mat from this first key here. We notice that it's, ooh, you know what? I'm just going to clean that real quick. I think when we played with it, the first click, I think that's a little better. And that's a little bit, honestly, a little bit more like a one-click key. We're going to take out a 2D histogram and attach it to the mat output. And we'll just slide this up until we get kind of a decent amount of black around Neil. We're going to slide it up and just until, you know, it looks black. And I think, and make sure we're hopefully not fudging our edges too much here. And I would say that is reasonable for the purposes of this shot. So we've got a histogram, and then one last thing we're going to need. Let's keep this G mask up. You know, basically I like to do kind of suppression on one path and keying on another. I'm going to take out a G mask. Look at that. That's a G mask that works. We're going to get a G mask. Offset a little bit. Make sure it isn't getting into the microphone up on top. We're going to take that G mask and this histogram and blend and comp, the new way of doing things, front, back. Honestly, you know what? I'd rather put this in the front and this in the back, because just in case, then I would have some transparency control. And switch to multiply right here. And there you go. We get rid of all the garbage around Neil. And you know, it's never a bad idea to look at a key gammaed up. So that would be Shift Control 3 to use that 2.2 gamma we created. I would say that much nonsense probably would never show up on our shot, so we're not going to get too concerned about it. So there's our mat for Neil. Here's our foreground for Neil, with a little thumb fix in it. And let's just get a mux, because we're going to need our background here just a little bit. We'll just get out a mux node, stick it on our background here. And I'm kind of generous with these, with a bit of a nuke background. I like to use a few. I use my muxes instead of where you could have a not nuke. And let's try blend and comp here. Grab it again. Front, matte, and background. And Neil, right out of the box, right? I mean, it was shot for it. Looks pretty reasonable in this scene, right? Everything's in the same color space. Edge quality is pretty darn good, right? In this same G mask, you could conceivably use this G mask for his foreground, but also maybe blend and comp the unhistogrammed key, front, back, matte would be this G mask. And here we can put the unhistogram key where we need all the motion blur we can get. And then look at our comp. You know, it's reasonable. Now, things look jaggy, right? We don't have any filtering on, but if you look at like 200%, we can really see the pixels. And we'll even compare it to Neil. Probably would want our G mask here, right, to help that finger a little bit. And we can even look at our comp in context to do that. So that was plus on our comp as we're building it, and plus over here, and then we can just look at one while we draw G masks. It didn't help that much, right? Too bad. But this is a place also where a little bit of batch paint can go a long way on your mat or your foreground or even on top of your comp. But to me, that's, you know, great edge quality. And, you know, right, this is an easy shot, but we're getting our main things down here now. Okay, then the last thing that we need is Neil has sort of a big light coming down like this on him. So does this background, but this railing really looks a little glowy without Neil's shadow back there. So next step would be to take our mat. This is our whole mat for our whole Neil deGrasse Tyson, and we just put a 2D transform right on that. Just slide it over a little and down. Not even more. Great. Because I want to get maybe a little bit of his elbow also casting a shadow on that. So we've got that. I think a little bit of a blur, because everything looks good with a blur. And we're also going to need, we don't want this falling across our entire background. We only want it on this little railing, even though it's mostly black there. So we'll take our background with a new G mask from, I guess, the Mux. And look, here's another spot. We're going to go Shift Control 3 and use our LUTs again. And add a new shape. Right, and so this, since this is such a kind of mechanical straight line shape, we'll just select all those points, hit the break button, break tangent, and click on any of them. And we need a little offset of 1. And that offset of 1, you'll see, back to regular color space, is just critical for getting a decent anti-aliased edge out of the G mask. So to turn on our interactive. Got to zoom in a little bit. So we're going to go back to move. And just kind of tighten up this roto quick. We know it's a lock-off shot, so we're not going to worry about any kind of animation or tracking here. We're just trying to get it all to line up. And I like working in this really zoomed in mode. Seems to get kind of the best precision out of the deal. Great. So there's our roto of that. I think that'll be good enough. Now I tend to always blur my G masks. I think that this is something that was much worse in log mode, but seems to me a pixel at least of blur on top of that anti-alias usually helps. And blend and comp here. Now, here we're also going to use a multiply, right? And that gives us Neil's mat moved over onto that railing. And we're going to color correct our background through that mat. So here's our mat, and here's what we're color correcting. And I think it's really important to sample our blacks as a starting point, and even just type those numbers. For now, we can just do a gain of 0, but give it an offset of 0.00169 and 0.00161 and 0.00339 And that just sets kind of the blacks at the same as our scene. And then just put a little gain back in to taste. I think in the real shot, I kind of did this twice. I did one color correct for the gleam and one for the rest of it, but I think for our purposes here, we're in pretty good shape. I'm seeing a little bit of a white edge up there, which would be, to me, a G-mask problem. So, but maybe Neil even goes in front of that. So we're not even we're gonna see where we stand. But one thing we will notice is that having done this severe color correct on our background, we've now completely hosed the grain. And yes, I know that we're gammed up, but we've completely hosed the grain in this area of the frame. So Control Shift 1, that's what our shot's really looking like so far. But if we're going to match the grain, we're going to go find it. So let's go find a regrain node. Come on. So front, back, and same mat. And all we have to do is go to Custom and select this nice dark grain right here. And you can see that out of the box, it's a better match than you'd think, right? And probably good enough for this show. I find very often that when you sample grain, you get numbers here that are a little higher than you actually want. I'm not sure why that's true, but it's important maybe to sometimes look at these numbers. But here I feel like, wow, it's so successful. Let's just leave that alone. But there is one thing that I do like to check here, and that is I select all these values, and we'll just zoom way the heck in here. And you notice that in the blue, we got one little extra control point here in our grain curve than we want. And that'll just prevent us from getting grain sometimes if something's too dark. So I like to remove those. So basically, we've set our black point grain. I'd say we're done, especially if that's what they're going to see on TV when they first look at it. I'd say we're done graining that. So that's his shadow, and then here's Neil now with a little drop shadow of him onto that background. And then really all we have to do at this point is, take a LUT editor, and we're going to use the Lin back to log, right? And notice that now, click, actual input and output are a pretty good match, right? We haven't messed anything up in any way. And I've checked with two of these LUT editors, at the beginning, a log to Lin, and the end, a Lin to log, that, you can put something straight through and it's fine. So we know that that's symmetrical. But we're looking at it in video color space. Here we're going to try Alt-Shift-2 with the look on. And that's exactly what they're going to see in the DI room now. So to me, I would say, they've got this nice green kick that they lit that sort of reflects all that. Well, the one last thing I would say is that maybe he still needs a slight color correct to match his background. And let's just jam it up and even take I feel like with our blacks up, his black looks just ever so slightly lifted in here compared to that background. Not loving that white edge, but I maybe would go back and adjust the keyer a little bit. But this looks ever so slightly lifted. So why don't we take our suppressed foreground and we'll just give him a little color correct. Take this background. So let's sample the front we'll sample the back, right? And we see that, look, his green is, so let's just look at this. The quick way to do this is, well, the really quick way to do it is to go to curves and hit match. And look at our shot. And now, if we bypass this, you can see that his blacks have come down to meet the rest of the scene a little bit. So I tend not to use those. First of all, some of this was without going in and losing things. I tend to just use our main pieces here. So if we take our red channels, what we sampled to be the black color in the background, and we subtract what's the black color in the foreground, we should be able to correct these so they both match. So what we're going to do is go 0.00192, and we subtract 0.00920 from it. Now we can see that these two numbers match, right? So we'll do it again for the green channel. We're going to take 0.00188 and we subtract 0.00976, and now those two numbers match, right? And then we take our blue. If we take our background, which is 0.00306, and we subtract 0.00016 from it, and look at our final comp, now we have blacks that are really falling in line to match each other, right? So turn back on go back to regular viewing. Even look all the way at the end through our LUT, and using our show CC file. The only thing I would say is that he has sort of a, magenta, a lack of green compared to this background. But I would just say, if you just give him like a little touch more green, maybe take down the brightness by a little notch. To me, that would be the kind of the finishing. How would you know that? Well, if you had a medium gray in the background, and you could really start comparing that to, the lit up parts of his suit, that would be awesome. Otherwise, it's sort of just an eye thing that you kind of get used to feeling that green in the background. So now that we're here, let's go to our unlutted comp and just run the gauntlet, right? Like so. Here's our basically no LUT on it and blacks up. I would say we have a pretty damn decent match between here and here. Ever a tiny bit of key coming in that we don't love, and maybe a little outline over here, but that's for our more advanced keying class that's coming up. And then just look at the highlights real quick. Certainly that green over here, we're absolutely seeing in these lights to a degree. So let's go back to the LUTted version and look at it through our 3D LUT. That's Alt-Shift-2. That's our standard LUT for the show. And I would say that comp is pretty damn done, other than just a little bit of giving ourselves some keyframes and whatnot. I mean, his hair is always going to have sort of a little flashed value to it, I find. And nobody seems to be objecting to his hair being kind of a lighter than full black. I mean, I think maybe he's graying a little at the temples. Yeah, I think the rest of it's going to have to wait for our advanced keying class, because we're kind of getting there on our time. So then it's just a matter of a render at the end. And here's one for all you who don't know it. If you select this, make sure it's yellow, and hold down your T, you'll get the duration to go in there. Here, let's double click on it. T gave us our duration, also gave us our bit depth and our frame rate. I'm going to just switch it to 23 because our dailies came in wrong. And also you can just hold down the N, notice yellow here, and click over here, and you'll get your name for your shot right here for this node. And all we have to do is then erase foreground And that'll be this shot in our show. Well, I want to thank you all for looking today. We got a lot of ground to cover in the other shows that are coming up. This has been great. I enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the bulletin board, and we'll be talking about ideas and questions. Thank you very much for attending, and I hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Bye-bye.